we're actually going to kind of continue our series, Free Reign. I know that I think I told you last week that last week was the finale of our Free Reign. But kind of like a good Lord of the Rings movie, it just never wants to end, or the Avengers one, where I felt like I was getting out of my seat to leave the movie theater, like, oh, it's still going on. So this is kind of the material that was sort of cut out of the series that I wanted to kind of add in to you to kind of wrap up this series. And like I said, next week we'll touch on a little bit more lighthearted one of relationships. I guess lighthearted, depends on where you're at. But anyway, tonight though, in fact, actually tonight I entitled my message Surrendering Your Isaac. Surrendering Your Isaac, and in a little bit that'll make a little more sense to you. But again, in that whole series, Free Reign, we've been talking about how, what it is to be free in Christ. And last week we talked about specifically what it is to stay free and the importance of sort of, feeding your spirit. But there's something else too when we talk about what freedom is. And we see it in Galatians chapter 5, verse 13. It says, you, my brothers and sisters, you are called to be free, but do not use your freedom to indulge the flesh. Rather, serve one another humbly in love. Last week we talked about how true freedom, so often we think of freedom as, being kind of the captain of your own ship, you having control and being able to control what you do, how you do it, how you frame it. And yet the truth is, we talked about how, true freedom is kind of the reverse of that, and biblically speaking. True freedom is not, especially when it comes to overcoming problems or addictions or habits in our life, true freedom isn't getting control of the problem, it's surrendering control to the person of the Holy Spirit. And we talked about really what that looked like, but another kind of paradox when it comes to freedom that we find in the Bible, though, as well, is, and again, very different to how culture oftentimes identifies freedom, and we see it in that verse, is that true freedom is not found in getting, but in giving. It's not found in getting and living simply for ourselves, to get more stuff, to get more things, but it's giving. It's living for a purpose and a cause that's bigger than just you. And so I want to kind of unpack really what this looks like by looking at definitely one of the stranger, you might even say one of the more disturbing stories in the Bible. In fact, this is a story in the Bible that you probably won't find in your kids' Bible. In fact, I'm pretty sure most kids' Bibles have, if they're PG-13 at all, they're going to probably have this section cut out. So, but it's a significant story, and it's a story that the reason I share it with you, because I think it really speaks to me on several levels. And one of the things, the reason this story speaks to me, and again, it's a story we're going to find, if you have your Bible, you can actually go ahead and kind of jump there, but it's in Genesis chapter 22, and it's a story that speaks to me because oftentimes, while it's a disturbing story, this is a story of where Abraham is tested. He's called to basically sacrifice his son Isaac. And again, disturbing on multiple levels, but here's what I found is that oftentimes the places where the enemy would try to get us to doubt God's love, and certainly this story, if you just look at it on the surface, you would probably feel this way, is oftentimes the very place God most often uses to prove the extent of his love. The places where the situations, the circumstances, the calling where we're like, God, I don't get this. This doesn't make any sense to me. Maybe it's that failure. Maybe it's a disappointment. Maybe you find yourself in a loss. Those things that the enemy would love to try to get you to doubt God's love. See, I told you God doesn't love you. God doesn't care for you. Isn't it true that oftentimes it's in the midst of those difficult times, failures, disappointments, a loss, a season of grief, that what we actually come to find is actually just the opposite. It seems like it's in those seasons where God finds a way to prove the extent of his love most in those times. And truth is, in this story, it's no different. In fact, we're going to see it as in Genesis chapter 22. And again, this is going to feel a little more like a Bible study, but again, we're small groups, so I think we can handle it. So, but I think it's got some valuable stuff for us. So, verse 1, Genesis 22, it says, sometime later God tested Abraham. This is the test here. He said to him, Abraham, here I am, he replied. Then God said, take your son, your only son whom you love, Isaac, and go to the region of Moriah, sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on a mountain I will show you. Now we don't know exactly how God brought this message about to Abraham. Most scholars think that it was probably a dream that he had. I would describe it more as a nightmare. I can only imagine waking up. I mean, it's interesting. There's something you got to get, though, about Abraham is that, this is the first time that God's called him to do some crazy things. In fact, Abraham had a promise on his life given early on that, listen, Abraham, I'm going to make you a father to the nations. You're going to have as many kids and as many people in this nation, that as many as the stars in the sky. I mean, it's this incredible promise. And again, why I say this wasn't the first time it was a crazy thing, you got to understand that when he got that promise, Abraham was about 100 years old. And he's 100 years old, and he has his first baby, the first baby with Sarah, and ultimately has his son Isaac. So you can just imagine, here's Abraham, he's about 100 years old, giving birth to Isaac, and you can only imagine how that birthday went, as they're both getting the same birthday present, diapers, right? I mean, and yet that's what it is, and so he's got his only boy, and God's like, listen, I want you to take him to the top of this mountain. I want you to sacrifice him. And again, a crazy thing, disturbing thing. And again, you can just imagine Abraham's probably like, again, God, I know that you've got this promise on my life, that you've promised to bring about blessing through me and in my life. And you just imagine him as he's hearing this, like, okay, that's one way. Let's table that, God. Kind of like a brainstorming session. Like, there's got to be another way this can happen. Like, there's got to be another way I can step into the promise that you've placed on my life, that I can begin to see that the blessing that you've promised me begin to flow in and through my life. There's got to be another way than this. And yet, for all of it, it's just kind of like dead silence at that moment. It's really interesting. God is, as God so loves to do, kind of gives us a little bit incomplete instructions. Because the truth is, as you're going to come to discover, the command that God gave to Abraham, the call he gave to Abraham, it doesn't tell the whole story. There's more to this story. There's more to this call. And there's probably more that I'm sure that Abraham would have loved to have known before responding to this. But nevertheless, Abraham, he does respond to this crazy request. And we see it in verse 3. It says, early the next morning, Abraham got up and loaded his donkey. He took with him 2 of his servants and his son Isaac. When he'd cut enough wood for the burnt offering, he set out for the place God had told him about. On the 3rd day, Abraham looked up and saw the place in the distance. See, we begin to see a story here, and what you're going to come to discover is this story is less about sacrifice than you might realize. In fact, actually, it really has nothing to do with sacrifice at all, but it has everything to do with obedience. And we actually begin to see this in verse 4, where it says, on the 3rd day. On the 3rd day. See, I found most of us, when it comes to faith, having an attitude of faith, stepping out in faith, most of us are really good with the initial response. But true faith is actually found in obedience. True faith is found on the 3rd day. See, a lot of us know what it's like to begin strong in faith. God, I'm going to do this. I'll step out, do this crazy, this radical thing. But then about the 2nd and the 3rd day, when it starts to get hard and starts to get difficult, like, I think I'm out of this. And this is what I signed up for, God. And yeah, it's interesting here, Abraham on the 3rd day, I mean, that's enough time. Think about it. That 3rd day, he gets this crazy nightmare message. I don't know about you, but probably in 3 days' time, I could have found a way to talk myself out of this. Like justified a million reasons of why that this was not the thing for me to do. And yet in the step of obedience, God would end up doing something miraculous in his life. And so we continue, we see this on. In verse 5, he says, he said to his servants, "Stay here with the donkey while I and the boy go over there. We will worship." Oh, what an amazing attitude. We will worship. And then get this, talk about confidence. We'll come back to you. See, Abraham understood something, I think, about this. He understood that there was more to the story than this. There was a bigger picture at play. And Abraham, it doesn't say exactly what he said to take courage, but my guess is, in fact, in Hebrews, it actually said he was so confident that God was going to provide, that God was going to deliver his son from this situation, that even if his son died, he believed that God would resurrect him again. I mean, he had that much kind of crazy, obedient faith. And so he steps out in this, and he steps out in this promise. And again, what's cool about this is not about Abraham and his confidence in terms of he just got this incredible superhuman faith. It's more of a confidence. It's not so much a confidence that I can do this. I can handle this crazy request. It's confidence again in the character of God. Listen, if you're going to step out in faith in audacious ways, you got to put your faith, your trust, not necessarily in the what. Because sometimes, let's be honest, sometimes the instructions of God, sometimes the things God calls us to, they don't always seem very practical. They seem kind of crazy. They can seem kind of ridiculous. And it's in those times when you're looking at it like, God, I don't know about this. This doesn't make any sense to me. This is scaring the snot out of me. That you've got to decide, am I going to put my faith in myself or my faith in my circumstances or my faith in my faith? Like I can just tough it out. I can do this. I can give myself enough of a pep talk. Or are you going to put your faith in our God? In his character, in his promises where he says, listen, I'm good. Never will I leave you. Never will I forsake you. I'm there for you. And certainly for Abraham, that's what he did. He held on, I believe, to those promises. He knew that God had placed a promise on his life that, listen, I'm going to make you a father of many nations. It's not going to end here with your son. And so it continues on. Genesis 22:6-8. It says, Abraham took the wood for the burnt offering and placed it on his son Isaac. And he himself carried the fire and the knife. By the way, this is... Every story in the Bible is a Jesus story. Every story in the Bible is reflective of Jesus. And this is no different. This is foreshadowing of a bigger picture at play. Of eventually Jesus, being sent, Jesus coming in and taking up the wood, taking up the cross, paying a price, being a sacrifice for all of our sin, for all of our shame, for all of our junk. And so, here it is. Here's this picture. We know there's more going on in the story, and Abraham's stepping out there, and you can just imagine the tension. You can imagine the grief. You can imagine the heartache that's going on in Abraham's life. I mean, even though he's got this confidence that God's going to come through, it's sure not looking like it right now. I mean, you ever been in a situation like that? I mean, you got faith, you're confident, but when you look at the situation going on around you, you're like, I don't see how this is going to work out. This is not looking good. And so here he is. He's in this place, and they're walking up. They're heading up. They're getting ready to kind of build this altar and to kind of place Isaac ultimately on it and to do the seemingly unthinkable. It says, as the two of them went on together, Isaac spoke up and said to his father Abraham, Father, yes, my son, Abraham replied. The fire and the wood are here, Isaac said, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering? Really interesting. Abraham answered, God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering, my son, and the two of them went on together. I love what Isaac asks. I love the question. Where's the lamb? Where's the fire and the wood are here, but where's the lamb for the offering? I find it interesting that this kid, Isaac, was willing to ask a question that I don't think very many of us in today's church always ask. See, he understood something in asking that question. Where is the sacrifice? Again, he's asking something that sometimes we miss. And what we miss is that you got to understand, he understood that there was no worship without sacrifice. There was no, you could put it this way. He's basically saying, Dad, he understood. He's like, Dad, I get that there's got to be a cost to this. That praise always comes with a price. See, even Isaac understood that real worship, there's a cost, there's a price. You can't have a testimony without a test. You can't have victory without surrender. So you got to understand that worship is so much more than just a song. When we talk about worship, it's so much more than just singing a few songs, maybe clapping our hands, really, if we're really into it, jumping around a little bit, getting our groove on. It's so much more than that. In fact, Romans 12:1 speaks of what real worship is. It says, therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. Again, I don't know how many of you grew up with this song, but I used to sing a song, that was basically, hey, I'll bring you more than a song. I'll bring you more than a song, because a song in itself is not what you have required. That's what Paul's speaking about in Romans. That's what Isaac is referencing. In fact, even David actually speaks of this and references it in 1 Chronicles 21, verse 22 and through 25. And it's interesting because here David is he's kind of away from town. He's traveling, and yet he wants to find this place to worship God. And so he decides he's going to just basically buy his own place to kind of set up shop to worship God. And we see this in verse 22. It says, David said to him, let me have the site of your threshing floor so I can build an altar to the Lord, that the plague on the people may be stopped. Sell it to me at full price. Now here's what's interesting. I like what Aruna says to David. He says, take it. Let my Lord, the king, do whatever he pleases, whatever pleases him. Look, I will give the oxen for the burnt offerings, the threshing sledges for the wood, and the wheat for the grain offering. I'll give all this to you. In other words, Aruna's like, hey, look, David, I'm a fan of yours. You're the king. And there's probably in the back of his mind, it's like, hey, if I help the king out, the king's going to help me out, right? And so he's like, hey, just take it. It's yours. You don't get to pay anything for this. And yet, get what David's response is in verse 24. But King David replied to Araunah, no, I insist on paying the full price. I will not take for the Lord what is yours or sacrifice a burnt offering that costs me nothing. So David paid Araunah 600 shekels of gold for the site. That's equivalent of about $300,000 for this site. And it goes on, it says, David built an altar to the Lord there and sacrificed burnt offerings and fellowship offerings. He called on the Lord, and get this, the Lord answered him with fire from heaven on the altar of a burnt offering. See, for David, worship was so much more than just a song. See, for David, worship was more than just rejoicing over the fact he got a good deal. You ever gone to the store, like my wife, she loves getting a good deal. She's got me trained even now. Like I go into Marshall's or I go into Freddy's, and I'm like, the first place I go is the clearance rack. Like, hey, $5? Awesome, I saved like $6,000. At least that's what they'd have you believe, right? And so I've been trained to kind of get a good deal, and sometimes that's all we can think worship is just worshiping, rejoicing over the fact we got a good deal, we got an amazing deal, and certainly that's a part to it, but that's not all of it. Worship's so much more than a song. See, praise comes with a price. So often you look at someone who just seems like they're being blessed by God. The favor of God's on them. Listen, they didn't just arrive at that place overnight. There was a cost to it. There was a cost to their praise. There's a cost to their worship. And listen, the same goes for us. See, for some of us, I wonder if the reason why it feels like we're just not getting anywhere when it comes to our prayers, when it comes to our worship, we're like, man, I'm in here, I'm singing, I'm worshiping. It's because we don't get that. Again, praise comes with a price. It comes with a cost. There's another story that kind of speaks to this as well. It's a story where God spoke to the prophet Elijah, and Elijah, this is before his big epic battle with the prophets of Baal and, setting the altar on fire, and is, really cool story. Before that, Elijah was basically found himself alone during a drought time of the year by this creek bed, and with only but really to survive on nothing but this promise of God that, hey, listen, I'm going to feed you. If you'll just get to this place, I'm sending you. If you'll get to this place, the ravens will drop these Popeyes biscuits. Anyone have Popeyes biscuits? They're so good. These are Popeyes biscuits from the sky. They'll be there. They'll feed you. They'll provide you. And I love that story because it reminds us that what he was basically saying to Elijah by calling him to this place called Cherith. He says, listen, I want to bless you. I want to provide for you, but you got to get to this place. See, he's saying, I'm sending your provision, and the provision is for the person, but the provision is sent to the place. And listen, I think for some of us, so often we just want to stand, we want to sing some songs like, God, please bless me, pour your blessing, but we don't want to pay a price for it. We don't want to sweat for it at all. We don't want to do any effort when it calls, opportunities to serve or roll up our sleeves. We're like, man, I just want to stand on the sidelines. But listen, true worship is a surrendering of yourself. True worship